Right. Thanks for all. Thank you to you all for being here on this gorgeously sunny day in Auckland, those who are zooming in from Auckland. As I said, it's a pleasure to be able to present today. For those who don't know me, I currently work at Waipapa Ngātamarau, University of Auckland, as a lecturer. I'm lecturing in initial teacher education, both primary and secondary, and in master's and PhD programs as well. And so today I thought I would talk about something that's been on my mind a lot lately about how we can maintain our professionalism and agency as teachers in this world that's increasingly digital and AI. And so, what I thought I would do, I want to talk about a few different studies that I've been doing, and they're all interconnected. But I thought I would talk about a few of them and then have a pause for any discussion that might emerge. And then I would talk about a few more of the studies, and then we'll finish with some kind of thoughts about the future. I also want to acknowledge I was lucky enough to receive funding from the Marsden Fund Council, Royal Society Te Aparangi, which is no longer for social science research, unfortunately, but I was lucky to, I would like to acknowledge that funding. Um, so because this topic is sometimes something that people are really interested in, I'd invite you to immediately pop into the chat if you've got any comments that you want to make about risks and opportunities for mathematics teachers in this current and future digital and AI world. And and actually you can write questions or comments at any time during my presentation. And if you see someone else's comment or question that you like, please give it a thumbs up. And that way we can kind of gain a sense of the sorts of questions that lots of people might be interested in hearing the answers to. And while maybe some people are writing in the chat, I thought the rest of us can just take a look at this image that I have here, which was, 125 years ago, this was created, and it's an image of a future mathematics, well, a future classroom. It says it's predicting the year 2000, so it's 25 years earlier than today. And I think it is quite apt today because what we have here is clearly a knowledge-rich curriculum. There's a whole lot of old books going into a machine, and then that machine is churning out information that's been fed directly into the individual students who are sitting here. Not a very diverse classroom, all boys, it looks like, and and certainly very small class sizes, so that was a bit optimistic. But nevertheless, it's kind of an apt, in a way, this notion of a teaching machine has been around for a while. So my research over the past few years has focused in on these instructional platforms like Mathletics, Education Perfect, Maths Buddy, Matific. There's loads of them, and I'm sure everyone listening knows of these. And I'm interested in these because when I say these are partly AI powered, even though they might not be the AI that you were thinking of, the chatbot, large language model type of AI. These are an example of the sort of AI digital platforms that are already happening in our schools and kind of an indication of what might happen in the future. So I define these as online mathematics instructional platforms, and I call them OMIPs for short. And they're different from other kinds of maths apps for a variety of reasons. They're typically individualized, and they need to be individualized so that they can be adaptive. So the black box algorithm in the programs create content and sequences that are based on the needs of that individual learner that's logged into them. They claim curriculum coverage, so technically they could replace a teacher or replace a mathematics program because of this curriculum coverage. They are popular for the instant feedback that they give. They give assessment data to teachers and instant feedback for the students. A lot of them are gamified, not all of them. Education Perfect and Maths Buddy are not gamified, but a lot of the ones operating in the primary school space are. And they're subscription based. So they're quite expensive, in comparison to getting a textbook, which may last for many, many years. These have to be paid for every single year. And so it's an example of private companies operating inside of our public educational system. And they tend to be under-critiqued in the field of mathematics education research. The critique I found on these the ed tech industry came from the field of media studies instead. So over the past 7 years, I've been researching them and I've done a bunch of studies. I surveyed primary school leaders on their use of these platforms. I did in-depth analyses of the websites. I interviewed some teachers. I surveyed senior secondary school students. And most recently, I engaged in 4 case studies in schools. 2 of them were in year 10. One was in year 5, 6 in ILE and another was in a year 7 to 8 kura kaupapa, and my research assistant, Melina Amos, assisted with me there. But most of these studies were more focused in on learner identity in the context of these studies. But today I want to kind of draw from all of these studies to think about this idea about the professional and agentic maths teacher. Right, so the first study to share with you was a survey of primary schools, and this was done before COVID. So there's about 2,000 primary schools in New Zealand, so this was almost a quarter of them who replied. And of these, 79% were using these platforms as part of their program. So on one hand, this might be an overinflated number because the type of people replying to the survey might be more into these sorts of platforms. But then on the other hand, we know globally the online educational provision grew massively during COVID. So this could even be an underrepresentative number. Only less than 20% used free versions of these platforms, so they are expensive. Sometimes the school pays, sometimes the parents pay, sometimes it's a combination. And the reason schools were using them was as part of a balance, what they said it was part of a balance program. So they weren't looking at replacement for teachers. They just saw it as part of their program, providing learning support, and because they found them to be quite motivating and engaging for the students. Most schools did not have any hesitations or concerns with the platforms whatsoever. Second study was interviews with 12 teachers from 5 different primary and intermediate schools. And those teachers talked to me about how these omits could constrain their practice. So that the omits made decisions about the sequence or content of learning for the teacher, not necessarily along the lines that they would make. Sometimes there were limited relevance to their classwork. They would do things like, in one case, labeling students with a maths age, sort of like a reading age, which was different from their actual age. Some teachers felt they were out of touch with what the students knew, or that they excessively rewarded students with certificates and others didn't get the certificates. And also sometimes students could game the system by just you could just click the button multiple times until you ended up with a game reward at the end and no actual maths learning happened. So there was all these constraints, but on the other hand, 3 of the teachers talked about the way using these omits actually allowed them to exercise agency. So, for example, one teacher felt that the MathsWhiz platform she was using, because it had curriculum coverage, it enabled her the space to do some explorative problem solving that she might not have sort of felt comfortable doing if she didn't feel like the platform was sort of covering off all the content. The teacher was working in a Māori immersion class, and Matific was translated into Te Reo Māori, and it actually helped to deepen his own mathematics vocabulary. So the use of this platform was helping his own professionalism. And another teacher was talking about how using the mathletics helped her to create programs that were more catered for what she called the third wave learners, by which I took to mean neurodivergent students. So even though the literature says that EdTech can deprofessionalize teachers through reducing the teacher role with these invisible processes, giving teachers a lack of control over the system, because the flexibility of the old curriculum allowed these teachers, this ability to use this resource in the ways that worked for them, and their own sense of professionalism enabled them to use them in agentic ways. Now, I have a massive caveat on this that the type of teachers that volunteer to be part of a maths research project probably already have a whole lot of agency and professionalism. And that's why they volunteer for these projects. You guys here today on this lovely weekend day listening to a talk on maths have way more agency and professionalism than maybe the rest of the profession do. So we have to kind of read these results with that in mind. And the third study that I'll talk about before we break for a little bit of discussion is a survey that I sent out to senior secondary students, 7 different schools around the country, around about 640 responded. And this was sent out after COVID, after both of the big lockdowns that we had in Auckland. And so the students were answering them with quite a bit of understanding about the difference between online learning and in-class instruction. And we 3/5 definitely preferred in-class instruction. 1/5 saw benefits in both methods. Around a tenth preferred the online instruction, and you can see that it doesn't add to 100% because there were quite a few students where I couldn't tell what their preference was by their answer. But what I found interesting is, regardless of what mode of instruction they preferred, students really appreciated the same sorts of things. So being able to get help or feedback or ask questions, they really appreciated the teachers who were approachable in the ways that enabled them to get help from them, ask them questions. And similarly, they really appreciated those interactive types of platforms that gave them feedback and they were able to sort of seek help through that interactive online type of learning. They appreciated explanations and demonstrations from their teachers, but they also appreciated them if they were online. They liked a good learning environment was really important, and this could refer to the students in the class, or it could refer to kind of the safety and relaxing home environment. Having a well-paced lesson tended to relate more to the online learning, where the students were able to pace the lesson themselves, as opposed to in person, where the teacher has the control over the pace of the lesson. So that's something to learn from that online experience. And they also talked about having no distractions being important. Those distractions might come from other people in the classroom, or it might come from other websites. But a very strong thread through all of the responses from all of these students is that teachers are vitally important. And I just think we need to keep hold of that message firmly with both hands, that even in this increased availability of online types of learning, students see the teachers as being vitally important. So it's important to see these studies in the ideological context. So we're kind of in this framework of educating for 21st century citizens, even though we're already quite far through the 21st century. And this 21st century kind of education strongly connects to educational technology. And we've had this really strong focus on student-centered trend in education. I feel like we're coming to the end of the student-centered trend, actually. But Biesta talks about this being the learnification of education, where we reduce all of education to issues of student learning. And you might think, well, student learning is the most important thing in education, but actually education is a societal good, and there are other benefits, collective benefits to educating the populace that aren't reduced down to individual student learning. And Best also argues for the importance of teaching, like teaching in context, teaching with a purpose, and the teaching, the relationships that the teacher can make with the students. We're also in this ideological context of neoliberalism, which is a market approach to education involving individual investment, school choice, privatization, and the edtech industry absolutely fits in with this neoliberal model, with making money out of educational provision. So that's the ideological background to all of what's going on with edtech. And that's enough talking time. So I would like to kind of pause for 5 minutes of discussion. Just to summarize, these studies sort of have shown me that online learning modes are becoming more and more prevalent. They can constrain teacher practice, but this can be mitigated by program flexibility, and students still value and prefer their teacher. So the discussion topic being, what are the risks in the student-centered personalized mathematics learning platforms, and are opportunities worth the risks? So I don't know how to see the chat. Maybe if we can open up for some discussion and if anyone wanted to feed me questions from the chat.
So Joe wrote, a risk, limited knowledge of the background, mathematics ensures inability to recognize errors in answers.
Mm.
I wrote something a little bit similar. I think sometimes we can get a focus on the product and the output and not so much on the learning through some of this ed tech stuff.
Mm.
Donna's just put in localized and cultural context as a risk. I'm interpreting that to mean losing that perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to talk a bit more about that afterwards. These are lots of great comments. Are there any actual questions?
There's someone, Liam has said that the risk is, racing for completing, often, using guess and check approach. So that's one of the chat comments from Liam Hegan. There's something, yeah.
Yeah, that I have seen in observations this guess and check approach. I mean, guess and check is a euphemistic way of putting it. What I've seen is students almost without looking going tuk, 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 and pushing the button, pushing the button, pushing the button because they're multi-choice, and then eventually it's right, and they get a game, and so it's and the I mean the data shows that the student doesn't understand it, but they're there for the game, and so yeah. I see someone's written a lot of these platforms take the struggle of maths away, and the struggle in learning maths is actually part of the learning process. I really agree with this. It's quite often we don't emphasize in our teaching that struggle is a good thing. Sometimes we're trying to alleviate that struggle all the time, and I think these platforms do alleviate that struggle. There's always hints available and extra help you can get, and maybe we need to sort of embrace that feeling of confusion and not knowing and the struggle involved.
And Tracy has mentioned that it prevents flexibility. Olive mentions about the lack of student motivation to keep moving forward. And yeah, it's a good question. How do we address some of those things?
Anything
Yeah,
come
so
up in your, oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
Anything come up in your research about how the personalization idea sort of takes away from the community of the class, sort of all going in the same direction at the same pace?
Yeah, well, this is actually something I was going to talk about a little bit in the next part, but I'll talk about it now. I think this is actually a risk of the wider digital world that we're living in, this individual versus collective. And I think there's actually one article that I read about the Netflixing of education, and it's talking of, when you think about when I was young, we watched a TV. There were two channels. This is aging me. There were two channels, and we all watched a show, and the next day everyone would talk about that show, and there was this joint sort of feeling, and would wonder about what it was going to happen the following week. Whereas now everyone has their own individual Netflix algorithms, everyone's on their own shows and at different times, and there's not a collective experience. And so that sort of removes a bit of a joy from the experience. But then it's also dangerous when everyone has their own individual news feeds. And so no one's getting the same news. And so we're not even receiving the same information about what's going on in the world, and there's no collective understanding. So that you could argue the same problem in a classroom. There's really something to be gained from collective learning it together. And this does relate to Tracy's point about transom with the, work at different levels, hiding the flexibility in the ways that students can come to an answer. We can learn so much in hearing about the different ways students come to an answer when they're working on the maths problems, and learn from other people's ways because we're all working on the same thing together.
Mm.
Um,
And Tracy mentions that it reduces the communication of their ideas, the mathematical discourse that we want to happen in the classroom, because different people are on different things, so they're not
yeah.
communicating.
Yeah, and I'm going to try not to get political, but that's okay because communication's not in the curriculum anymore. So anyway, uh, never mind. I'll move away from that. All right, that I'm going to stop the chat, stop the discussion now because that's 5 minutes, and we'll come back to some more ideas at the end. And I just want to share a couple of other studies which further this a bit. Right, so when I looked closely at some of the online platforms, I was looking at their public-facing websites, and there was a lot of consistency in in the promises that they were making. And so these are their advertising platforms, and they're promising to be engaging and motivating, to really advance progress and student achievement, to be personalized, providing assessment data for the teacher, instant feedback for the student. And the last one was a bit of a surprise for me, catering to affective issues. There was a whole lot on building confidence and learning maths in a safe way, or making students love maths. And when you look at these promises, there's absolutely you how could you deny that this is brilliant? These 5 promises just sound wonderful. But it's more fun to be critical. And so if we look at these, we can actually consider the flip side of all of those promises. So the engaging and motivating aspects of these platforms stem from gamified learning, behaviorist techniques such as rewarding with prizes and points and certificates, and consumerist behavior. And even in the very young platforms pitched at 5-year-olds, there's the ability to earn points, but then also spend points, and spend those points on things like furniture for the avatar and stuff like that. So it's really promoting a capitalism. The progress and achievement focus and the personalization of learning is really portraying learning as an individual investment in an individual's own future and an individual enterprise. And this is what we were just talking about before, with learning being an individual rather than a collective. The assessment data that goes to the teacher and the feedback to the student is part of what learning media talk about as the big data that is collected by these companies. And what I think we don't appreciate enough is that every single keystroke, every minute of time that students are on these platforms, the companies are collecting that as data, and they're using that data to refine their programs. And although they're in it for educating students, they're also in it to make money. And so all of this data is going to the company ultimately to make them more profitable. And there's for some, I mean, I don't know quite how the algorithms work, but every minute that students spend, every minute you spend on any kind of digital platform longer is somehow more profitable for the company. So they're looking at ways to keep the students on these platforms for as long as they can. And I think the pitching of catering to these affective issues is worrisome, because it ends up portraying school maths as being ineffective or boring. Quite often, when you're sort of saying, when you have a whole bunch of maths exercises rewarded by a game, you're actually giving the message that maths is boring, therefore you need a game in order to be motivated to do it. And so it sort of creates an idea of school maths being boring or ineffective. And in some cases, some of the advertisements were actually even implying that the school maths classroom could somehow be dangerous, because they were literally saying things like learn maths in the safety of your own home, for example. So all the promises that these platforms make, they have a dark side as well. So you need to kind of look at both sides of the coin. So for the last bit of the more recent studies I've done have been these case studies. And because I was focused on learner identity, I'm not going to go into an enormous amount of detail in these, but I'm just going to share a few snippets from the data I collected in them. And this one here is from a student who was sharing her screen with me from Education Perfect and showing me her scoreboard. So she has 724 points, which ranks her as 35,090th in the country. And I just found that really fascinating that you might have a ranking like this. You can see across the top there's class, school, and global ranking. So you can be ranked in your class and you see the names of all the people and where you rank compared to them. So it's strongly promoting competition. But the notion of having a global ranking to me seems it seems ridiculous, quite frankly. So I know that competition can sometimes be used in meaningful ways in the classroom to add a bit of fun to the classroom and motivate through competition, but this seems to be promoting competition in an extreme way. One other thing that struck me is that while I was having an interview with the teacher and he was showing me around Education Perfect, this message popped up from Education Perfect: Claire needs help. Claire's not her real name, but Claire needs help. And I asked him about it, and apparently while she was at that very minute working on some work on Education Perfect, she must have gotten a question wrong a couple of times. Could have been a typo, we don't know. But this message had come through that she needed help. Now, I know from my interviews with her, she didn't want that help. She wanted to have the control of when she asked for help and from whom she got her help. And she didn't like being given help when she didn't ask for it. So here we have the platform taking away her own agency by deciding that she needs help and sending this message to the teachers. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I am sure that she didn't know that the everyday work she was doing was being so closely monitored. I mean, it's been monitored by AI, but it's been monitored in a way that sends a message on to a teacher. And it kind of breaks your usual contract of knowing when an assessment is an assessment and knowing when you're being surveilled by the teacher. And in the literature, they call this data valence, which is sort of surveillance with data. And it's all part of sort of this bigger collection of big data picture. And I just want to share from the year 5-6 class. This is one boy's avatar. When he was showing me around Matific, and you can see he's got this great hairstyle and lovely outfit and awesome whale balloon in the background. And these are all things that he paid for with the coins that he's earned. If you look at up the top, he's got a ranking of 60, a score of 65. He's got 615 points and almost 150,000 coins from the maths that he's done on this platform. So he's pretty wealthy in the Matific world, I've got to say. These are, he's been able to buy a lot of things, and he is very immersed in the Matific world. He loves it. He showed me all around. He showed me his scrapbook that's full of the characters, and he showed me all the certificates he'd won and the trophies he'd collected, and they're all in the scrapbook as well. And he showed me one of his favorite lessons, which was this one. And it's your typical multi-choice, easy to guess kind of full of hints kind of activity. But the reason it was his favorite is because at the end of it, you get to pick a prize, and he could pick the egg. And I think he picked the egg that's second from the right, that then emerged out with this fluffy kind of toy that he gave a name to, and that toy goes in a scrapbook. So he's a classic example of the result of the collecting of that big data. The Matific sees what the children are interested in spending their time in, and it's reading about the characters and the creatures and the earning of these egg prizes and things. And it's very far away from the learning of maths, but it's very much immersed in this Matific world. And I found that quite interesting. So I'm currently working on an article with Melina, and we're looking at these platforms in terms of both opportunities and risks. And one opportunity in Matific is that it can enhance te reo, particularly for pāngaro. It does give more opportunities for parents to get involved in education. Melina's written an article on that because Matific really actively encourages the parent involvement. Can give access to maths learning when the classroom might be difficult. And I won't go into big details there, but for those that can't access the learning in the class, Matific is an option. But it is a superficial and competitive version of maths. We lose local and cultural relevance. These are all offshore created products, even when they're translated into languages like Te Reo. And then there's the data valence issue that I've talked about. So to summarize these, the decision to use these platforms in our classroom should be an agentic and professional decision, and it should be made with the knowledge of all the risks as well as the opportunities. We need to acknowledge that EdTech is really powerful and it's seductive. Their promises are really appealing, and the big data that they collect enables them to provide a product that is potentially going to take away from what the teacher might want to do in the classroom. And so Italand talks about this as a relocalization of power from the teachers to these EdTech companies. And we really need to be aware of that potentiality. And so the question is, how might we maintain our teacher professionalism and agency in this digital and AI world? And so while you're thinking about questions or comments to make for the discussion at the end, I think what I'll do is I'll just push on to the last little point that I was going to make. And that's about what's coming up next. So in May, the Honourable Erica Stanford announced that there would be extra funding to support students at primary and intermediate school. $56 million for 143 new. Here's a maths problem for you. We have a ratio of 56 million will get us 143 full-time maths interventionist teachers at year 0 to 6. So we can work out perhaps how many teachers 40 million will get. Adding together, it's going to be more than 200. If someone wants to work it out, they can pop it in the chat. And these teachers are going to be building on the current pilot. Now, the pilot involved 3 different versions: an in-school version with a suitably qualified maths teacher giving tuition, an online version where they were using Matific and Education Perfect, which happens to be the 2 platforms I just talked about, or a hybrid of the 2 version. Now, one thing, we know that we're going to need an enormous amount of support, but I think particularly for years 7 and 8, because with the more difficult new curriculum and the fact that these students haven't had the new curriculum from 0 to 6, there's going to be enormous gaps. There's also going to be gaps highlighting out with this new year 2 assessment that's coming out. But we also know there aren't 200 maths teachers suitably qualified floating out there just waiting for a job. I mean, they're already in schools and we're already short on maths teachers, right? So to me, it seems obvious that Education Perfect and Matific will be the option that's used, not the suitably qualified maths teachers. There's going to be more of these platforms, and this time they're going to be government endorsed private companies inside our public schooling. And I think we need to absolutely be aware of the risks as well as the opportunities of that. So that's the end of my talk. Now I'll stop sharing and we do still have time for discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say that if you let the technology take over, then we will get all the negatives. It's just a tool. Use it as just a tool.
Mm. Absolutely. And this is what I'm really the message that I'm really trying to put out there. It's just a tool, but this notion of if you let it requires that the teacher to be agentic and to be professional and not let it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. You need the teacher to be in charge of it and ensuring the students, like you said, do get what they expect from it. So if you're getting notifications, then have you already organised with the students that you'll act on that, or were you not even expecting it to come up?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Annie.
I'd like to just say a couple of things. With the new curriculum coming in at year 7 and 8, I know that my teachers, I'm Tracy Hazewood, I'm head of maths at Fiordland College. They found it really useful to give them confidence in teaching new material. But as we've gone through the year, they've started to realise that they can actually teach it in other ways. So the idea is they're not going to be that reliant on them next year. So I think it has got a place for non-math specific teachers to help support them if they use it in the right way. And then really important to work with those teachers to say, once they've got their confidence, to start moving away from it. So in the short term, I do see it as a tool that our primary teachers are going to engage with a lot of the time. I think at secondary school, we're actually confident in our ability, and we know that we can use things as tools, and we can use a bit of this and a bit of that. But I do see it as something that's going to be important to help us move forward.
I mean, absolutely, we need we need whatever support we can get for teachers. I mean, it's an enormously challenging job, and in the primary space, they've got that enormously challenging job over 8 different curriculum areas. And this is a message that I try to give, particularly my primary students, when they say, "Can we use Khan Academy for, as part of our lesson plan?" And I say, Khan Academy is really fabulous for you to watch and learn and make sure you know how to do it. But then you be the teacher. You do it, you be the teacher in the classroom. And absolutely what you're saying, Tracy, learn from these tools and then use it as a professional upskilling, and then, improve your own teaching. That sounds fabulous.
I think someone had mentioned, I think it was Joe Catchpole, that we shouldn't always assume that all students like to go online and they want to do, online work. Some students really like to use a pen and pencil and, a book, and then take the textbook and start working. So we can't always assume that all of them like to go online. I think it was Joe who mentioned, I think it's a good point.
It's a really good point, and actually something I didn't mention with the year 10 classes. I was in 2 year 10 classes. One was in a school that was really technology focused and driven and innovative, and was all the latest. And the other school was a really kind of traditional school, and they were kind of starting to sort of push aside the technology and more of a back to basics. The students in those 2 classes spoke the same way about it all. It was I was fascinated by. So it didn't matter that they're in these different contexts. And all of them said that there's a benefit to pen and paper. All of them. And all of them, when I say all, I had 5 in-depth interviews with in each of the classes. And none of them saw any disadvantage to pen and paper at all. Whereas when I was asking about the online or the digital, there was much more mixed results about whether they liked what things they liked and disliked. But they were really in favor of pen and paper. So that was interesting.
Hi, Lisa. I can see one question here that says, have you shared your research with the minister? So that's from Donna.
Yeah, the minister doesn't love me at the moment. I've been a little bit too open in my criticism of recent decisions. So I do not have the ear of the minister. I would love to share it with you. Yeah. Jared, you could edit that part out when you.
Noted.
Yeah. So we've got 1 minute, so would anyone like to have one last question? I see that there's lots of really great comments in the chat, so I hope people are reading those as well. Well, I just want to finish by saying thank you all for the professionalism that you're showing by coming along on a Saturday and learning stuff. I just think it's absolute. It's just a real strong message that teachers are professionals, and sometimes it feels in the media that the teachers are not being portrayed in this professional way. So well done, and thank you for coming along. And yeah, I hope something that I said made you think today. Kia ora.
I would like to thank Lisa for a very thought-provoking presentation today. you've made us think about being agentic with AI and with the digital technology, and a lot of interesting observations from everyone in terms of using it as a tool, and we shouldn't make too many assumptions in the classroom. So there's a lot of thinking for us to do.